Good morning and welcome to our webinar around about adaptability, which, to coin a phrase, we're seeing as the emerging new PPM normal. And the reality is, for some people, they're already there. My name's Ian White, and I'll be walking this through with you this morning. Hopefully you'll find it interesting. We're trying to avoid very much it being a product pitch, but really as a bit of provoking thought to some extent, and giving you some ideas that you may want to use internally. There will be a few product slides at the end, but it's really very limited just to give some examples. Okay, so what are we going to cover today? We're going to obviously I'll talk a little bit about my background. We'll talk about what we mean by adaptable and how it really is already emerging, but it's been emerging for a number of years. We'll talk about current states, where people are, and look about how the project world as a whole has evolved over the last few years. We'll talk about what makes adaptability, what makes an adaptable PMM, which is PPM. So PMM, PMO, how that's going to work. Talk about what sort of self-assessment you can look at to decide where you are, and a little bit about how you can move from where you are to where you wish to be. And as I said before, a few examples and give you some ideas of what you can do moving on. And let's come on. So I joined Projectum sort of going towards a year ago now, just last September, and I'm the commercial director there. Before that, I spent 11 years as the director for PPM for Western Europe for Microsoft, and as a result of that, I have spent quite a lot of time talking to all sorts of organizations, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's financial, banking, telecoms, agricultural, all sorts of sectors, professional services, you name it. And what you do is you learn over time, you observe, and hopefully it starts to sink in what works, what doesn't work, where people are trying to go, and what are the challenges that they're facing on a day-to-day basis. So that's the background, that's where we are. And let's have a look at, what sort of background I've got to actually justify that. So I say it's in my DNA, and it is. It's been with me for a very, very long time. I've been working with collaborative technology since 1988, with the first ever network-based email solution, which was a thing called CC Mail. Some of you who are on the older age may remember that. And I sort of moved from that into Lotus Notes and Domino. I joined Microsoft to support a thing called Microsoft Office Crew, which was a collaborative technology, and then moved on to the various project platforms that have been around for some time with Microsoft. And now, as we move into the new world of Project for the Web, the Common Data Service, Power Platform, that's my area of interest. I mean, I go so far back, there was a thing called PertMaster that some of you may remember, which was essentially a standalone project management tool around the same time as the first version of the Microsoft Project client. But they all share a common denomination, and that's that it's about technology-enabled collaboration, whether it's ad hoc, whether you're doing something, essentially in a shared list, or something which is much more formalized that you might be doing, say, with Project Online, where it's highly structured, but it's about people working together in an effective way. And this is really becoming more and more important. And I'll explain why as we move forward through the presentation. Now, the presentation is something that is entirely new. I've built it over the last few weeks. There's some research that I've done which sort of informs it, and some of it is based upon my expertise. expertise. So what is that exactly is adaptable? So I always sort of start with a dictionary definition because to me that's the most important area. And it's the quality of being able to adjust to new conditions. You know, your environment changes, you have to change with it. Now that may be a personal environment, that may be a business environment, but you know, it may be your competition has changed. All these things cause you to have to be adaptable. And then the other area maybe is that your ability to take what you know and use it in a different context. So that's about modification. That's saying, well, I've done it this way here. I could apply that same amount of knowledge somewhere else, and that's a good place to be. As we move on, we sort of see that we have to sometimes deal with almost spontaneous change, and we have to react and adjust in near real time. And what I mean by that in this particular case is that this is not sort of the broad systematic and systemic systems, but this is you as an individual or organization as an individual has to be able to say, right, you know, something's happened and we have to do it in a different way. And that is about adaptability. And on a sort of personal area, most people know that in 12 months' time, they won't be doing the same thing as they're doing today. And they're not doing the same thing exactly as they were doing 12 months ago. Because through those waypoints, we have changed. We are changing constantly. And one person really understood that and really observed it in a clear and precise way. And that was this guy, Mr. Charles Darwin. He didn't come to this quickly. It took him time to go through many observations to actually understand how, you know, similar species in different environments change in different ways. And this is actually really important. You know, there isn't a one size fits all here. It is what is best in the environment that you happen to be in. And that's one of the things that we learned from Charles Darwin, that not everything changes in the same way. It changes to fit its surroundings. And the PMO and the EPMO is changing. What's required of it is new. And that's the sort of thing that we have to really be considering. So where are we now? Well, the evolution of the EPMO, by the way, for those of you who may not have seen that before, that's a enterprise PMO. It's a new term, relatively new term, that was defined by Gartner. And this is sort of a hierarchical view of the world where you have an enterprise PMO at the center and subsidiary or divisional PMOs working inside organizations. And, you know, whether you have that or you don't have that, essentially running the portfolios, running the programs, understanding what the business needs are, that's the PMO. So they're driving change, and the way they want to work is changing, and the way we want to support them changes. But if we look over history, there's some interesting things that sort of come out, and it's sort of this thing in the project world. And the thing is, it doesn't always work. And I've sort of picked out some key things here over time to have a look at here. So we start off on the left-hand side with the pyramids. Now, the pyramids have lasted a long time, but if you know anything of the history of pyramids, they sort of failed. They didn't really work because the idea was that the pharaohs that were buried inside them wouldn't be disturbed. And we pretty well all know that graves had been robbed almost from 5 minutes after they were built. And this is the nature of things. Below that is the Great Wall of China. It didn't actually stop some of the invaders getting into the wrong side, shall we say, of the Great Wall. And, you know, it evolved and it changed over time as well. When we come to more modern times, we see the arrival of the Gantt chart from Mr. Gantt in 1917. In 1931, I picked out the Hoover Dam, which was a monumental build at that time. And then as we move forward, we move to 1957, when we start to see the space program driving some much more complex project management skills. And as we move through time, and I'm not going to pick out all of them, we see different styles of projects being run, different sorts of PMOs around that emerging, the evolution. One of the ones I really like is the one in 1975. It doesn't, you probably won't guess what that is from the icon, but it's the evolution or the identification of the mythical man month. And this is the idea that if you take one man, it takes 1 month to build a wall. If you put 2 men on it, it'll take them half a month to build the wall. And we know that's not true. And actually, when you take it into, say, software, it takes 1 man and 1 month to write some codes, it'll probably take 2 men 2 months to write some code. And as we move on through the various styles and the various different ways that people organize themselves together, we see different frameworks coming out through PMBOK and PMI, Scaled Agile, and so on and so forth. And the reality is, it's changing all the time. The way we want to work changes all the time. And we need to adapt to those changes, but we need to realize that there's value in all of them. None of them are wrong. They're just, ways that sometimes work in some contexts and work in different contexts. And we need to be able to use whichever of them are going to be most suitable, or maybe multiples of those over time. So let's look at a bit more about what we think are adaptable qualities. So what are the key qualities of an adaptable organization? So I really asked myself this question, and I'm not trying to be exhaustive here. I'm sure you can find many other things as well, but I'm just trying to pick up some of the ones which I think are the most interesting ones right now. First one is I've called location independence. This is the ability of us to work wherever we want to. And this sort of is a theme that repeats itself. And this is due to the evolution of technology. Now, what I mean by that is the internet is almost everywhere now, and with the new satellite-based internet delivery, it really is going to be absolutely everywhere. So this idea that you are tied to the office or tied to a physical connection, that's sort of going away. And often the real reality is power. Power is our limiting factor, whether our batteries will hold out or whether we can plug in somewhere to keep our machines running. These are the things that we worry about more than anything else. Have I charged my phone? Is my pad fully up to speed? Will my batteries last out in my PC, in my laptop? Interesting to see that when you look at what the manufacturers are doing, they're trying to reduce the voltages and increase battery life, because they really see one of the key competitive areas in the market is the ability for the machine to stay on for extended periods of time. But then, as I said before, or as I just talked about, is that it shouldn't really matter which device that you're using. Why should I care? And the reality is, right now, if you're using a solution, it should be able to work, and this is, as a PMO or as a EPMO, as a resource manager, as a project manager, it shouldn't matter. You should be able to work on your phone, on your pad, on your PC. It's whatever works for you, wherever it works for you. And we're moving towards non-touch devices. We're moving towards the idea that using something like HoloLens, as a good example, we'll look at a building or look at a component that you're building and say, all right, I can see that. It's, that's now 30% built. And we'll update the project plan to say that's now 30% complete, because it's actually used artificial intelligence to work out how far along it is. Now, that won't work in every case, but in some cases, that's going to work really, really well. And as a result of all this is home working. Where your team is, where your colleagues are, really is becoming more and more irrelevant. I've worked from home with travel. I've worked from home for the last 12 years. Recent events associated with coronavirus really haven't changed the way that I work. changed the way lots of other people work because they haven't had the benefit of doing what I do. Having said that, I do need to meet people. I do need to socialize from time to time, otherwise you get a bit lonely. But the idea from a management point of view that you could just look over the partition and see what people are doing and physically go and coach them, that's becoming less and less of a reality, and new ways of doing that have to be found. So we're in the middle of living through what has been described as a black swan event. And nobody this time last year, and nobody predicted what has happened starting in December, January, what we've gone through, the horrors of what we've gone through. But there will be more, whether they're pandemics or other things. There are always black swans. They come along, and whether they're from a competitor bringing out something that you weren't expecting, or whether it's something geopolitical, you just don't know. You don't know what they are or where they are, but they're going to come along. But it doesn't stop you as an organization building your own black swans. So, you build new competitive advantage that disrupts your competitors in a way that they weren't expecting. So, black swans aren't always bad. They're just things that come along, and they're ones that you either have to react to or ones that you cause other people to react to. Change is about adaptability. It's about challenging what people do today. It's about, not having the ability to be nimble, not having that ability to react. Now, that's sort of the thematic point of the whole presentation. But, it relies on the fact that you're not too bureaucratic, you're not too hierarchical, that you are empowered to do stuff. But by the same token, you may have strengths that you want to amplify. Just because it's been around for a while doesn't mean to say it's bad. It may be really good, and we may need to do more of it. And so, when challenging the status quo, you also need to recognize those things that are strengths as opposed to things that are weaknesses. And you have to you have to be introspective. So you have to have a set of core values. You can't just sort of flip-flop your way through life. These are things that we're going to do, and we've essentially got to stay with them because that's what you stand for. That's what Projectum stands for. You don't want to go off-piece too much. If we started, decided we're going to build out a version of Projectum ice cream, people would think of us as being a very strange organization. And the reality of that is that you don't. You have to look at what you're doing, and sometimes that means stopping doing things because there are always some initiatives that really go too far away from the core values of the organization. And then you got to look at your people. Are you getting, these are your key assets. So, your people are the people, is what you build your business on. And are you working with those people? Are you developing those people in the best way? Are you allowing them to do all the things that I've got on the left-hand side there? And you have to be honest when you're looking both at success and failure. Success is failure, and failure can be success. And what I mean by that is, often when we're successful, we sort of overlook some of the things that didn't go right in the project or in the program, because overall we achieved what we wanted to achieve. But you have to be honest and say, well, actually, we didn't do that very well, or we didn't do this very well, or we managed to work our way around this particular issue. And the same goes for failure. Things that we did, overall, we might have not achieved what we wanted to achieve, but within that failure, we might have had areas that were actually really good, and we need to learn from and build on because they were, they were worthwhile doing. So these are about both people and the organization. And you've got to focus on both those things equally. You don't want to be colorblind to the different areas of your business as to, you're investing in one side and not investing in other. Taking a little drink here, a little bit dry. So in my research, I came across this. This is from a PMI event 9 years ago. And you can see on the deck there's a link to it. It's a really good paper written by Darwin. and definitely worthwhile reading the whole thing. But out of it, I found this table, which I thought was particularly interesting and worthwhile sharing today. And it really talks about the sort of the old ways, the traditional ways, the sort of ways that has evolved, and then what the next generation PM is going to look like. And to be honest with you, we are in reality a mixture of all of these things. You know, when you look down each of these columns, you'll find that things that you are, how can I say, still doing in the old ways, and some of the things you're doing in the new ways. So there isn't a right or a wrong here, but I think what we're seeing here are the trends and the things that are going to be coming through. And even though they were envisaged 9 years ago, doesn't mean to say they're not applicable now. So just focusing on a few of these, and the middle one there is really the idea of the PMO as a service, doing those things which others aren't doing, I suppose, is the best way to look at it. And you know, that's a nice way of looking at it. But when you look to the right as to where it should be, this is a much more strategic view of what the PMO should be doing. Is really understanding how to facilitate and link and amplify what an organization is doing, and actually identify problems before the organization identifies them themselves. I think this one is also, really important. When you look at this, is about probably today the PMO is about managing portfolios and programs, but the idea that you're managing a portfolio of benefits, that's really exciting. That's like really trying to deliver exceptional value to the business. And I think that is one of the really hardest areas for people to fully appreciate. We are moving into an area, I think some people may even be on the left here, of being quite rigid, but we're moving to an area where rules need to be adaptive, and because the organization has to be adaptive, you can't have the same set of rules if the business is changing. And the ability to easily change those rules, the ability to actually revisit those, understand what they're doing, tweak them, adjust them, is going to be more and more important. You can't live in a very rigid environment. I like the move from the what, the why to the who, I think is really important. And the idea that a PMO should be looking at its stakeholder management as its primary modus operandi, raison d'etre. It's about how we are perceived across the business, across the stakeholders, from a top down, from the top through to the bottom. This isn't just a top down, this is also bottom up. People have to be bought into it. And this is about giving people the information, making sure they have the right tools, making sure they can see what other people are doing to understand where the value is coming from the PMO. It isn't simply a question, should we be doing this or shouldn't we be doing this? And lastly, and possibly most importantly, is it's not about just preparing organizations for change, but it's leading them, explaining to them why. It's actually making people want to change rather than trying to, shall we say, smooth the way and give them some sugar on the pill. It's about making them wanting to change and want to adopt new ways of doing stuff. So you have to think about yourselves and say, are you really active at the moment? Are you really aware of what the things are you need to be aware of? Do you have the data? Do you have the solutions? How seriously does your organization take you? Do they, is it treated as the way that you want it to be? How much pain can you use? Pain actually is good. Pain is the way that you help people understand that you can make things better. Pain isn't bad. I talk about the last 6 months, but maybe it should be the last year. The last 6 months has been very painful, at least 3 months of it has. And does the business want change? And the reality of it is not all businesses do want change. It's a bit of a sad thing to say, But the reality is that some businesses are quite happy to be fairly, plod along and not see any change at all. But you may already have an adaptable mindset, but your tools are blocking you. Obviously, at Projectum, we provide tools to help you be adaptable, but we can actually work with all sorts of tools to help you develop and deliver on this adaptable mindset. So some of the questions that you can ask yourselves. Are you using AI? Can you automate some of those things that are fairly, shall we say, boring and things that you don't want to do? Chasing down people on a Friday afternoon to fill in their timesheets. Maybe you can have a system that will do that for you. You don't have to sort of constantly nag them. The system will do it for you. These are sorts of things. I'm sure there's better uses of AI than that. Are you hybrid? Do you really care whether you're waterfall, agile, bimodal, safe? Does it matter? Of course it doesn't. It shouldn't do. What it should be is, what's the best tool for the job? And if it's the right tool for the job, then fine. That's the one you should be using. You should be looking at your maturity and your complexity of what you're trying to solve, not worrying about which tool they are. That you should be just choosing what's the most effective tool for the job, and your system should be able to cope with any tool that you decide that you want to use. Are you really working as a team? Do you run virtual stand-ups? Is your tooling fully integrated? Are you aware of what everybody else is doing? Most organizations aren't. We obviously work with Microsoft Teams. It's really, really a great hub for bringing these things together and allowing people to really collaborate in a most effective way. And that's really important when you get to the remote collaboration. As I said before, you cannot control or mentor using your eyeballs anymore. You can't see what is going on. You can't look at somebody. The amount of people who are going to be working at least part of the time in a distance way is going to just increase and increase and increase. The other thing is, when you're working remotely, you have to sort of consciously try and get people to be involved. You have to get people to make suggestions. And of course, if you're going to make suggestions, allow people to make suggestions, you've got to be able to change direction and adopt those suggestions because they're better than the way you're doing it. Excel. Since my early days at Microsoft, this has also been my bane of my existence. If you're doing it in Excel, it's probably not the right way to do it, or today is not the best tool. It might have been the right tool 10 years ago. Find the right tool, but don't overcomplicate or oversimplify. Don't try to give people tools that are just overly complex. Don't try to force people into things that are overly simple. Find the right things for the job, but then bring the data together afterwards. That's the trick. You want to, if you're towing a caravan, you don't want to take a Ferrari. It's not the right car to do it. You want it, a 4x4 or something like a Range Rover. That's going to be a better job. Are you measuring or are you managing? And then what I mean by that is, if you're being really effective, you shouldn't have to manage. You should be looking at the realization that comes through the BI. You should be using BI to look at the exception reporting, because it's exception reporting that allows you to focus on the things that are going wrong. You don't want to spend too much time looking at things that are going right. I mean, I know it's nice to wallow in success, but the reality is you want to look for the things that you can do better. That's the important part. Is your governance supporting you or just slowing you down? Are you perpetually bucking the system? If you are, then there's probably things that you need to do to make the business more adaptable, to be more flexible, to be more responsive to the way that you need to work. And then lastly, and the bit that I sort of like the most, is, are you a leader or are you a manager? And the idea is that if you're a leader, people are coming to you and saying, how can you help us? you are good at negotiating with the other parts of the business. You're good at motivating people to do things the right way, and you are helping them evolve into a better organization. You may look like one of these. You may be traditional, you may be bimodal, all these different forms of agile or hybrid or what are those things. Frankly, this isn't what matters. This is not what matters. What matters is this. This is the thing that really matters. This is the thing we call controlled agility. And this idea is that we go from the top of the organization who build a vision. And through the PMO or the EPMO, we help them develop their strategy. And with that strategy, we help them understand the resources, the costs, and the timescales that you'll be needed to deliver that strategy. And then through the PMO, we break it out either into programs, or portfolios, programs, and eventually into projects. But the projects just live in a database. They're just, it doesn't matter whether they're traditional or modern, whether they're Jira, whether they're DevOps, whether they're Microsoft Project, Monday, whatever they happen to be. That data fits in to the database and then goes back up the chain and through the BI, comes back through into really good dashboards that the organization can understand that the vision is being delivered through its strategic alignment. And that's really where we want to be. That is what we want to be doing, because that's what will allow the organization to understand that the PMO is delivering the value that it was designed to build. And we use this, I'm using this really just to illustrate the next slide as to how these things fit together. Now, this is very much a schematic of what you just seen in a bit more detail. So we think of strategy as drivers, scoring of priorities, and we take those into databases that allow us to build programs and portfolios, whether they be waterfall or whether they be agile, with epics and story points and all those sorts of things. But we can take those and break those down into those various component parts. And from those component parts, we know that there's this collaboration part, which we use with teams, which allow us to manage the risks, the issues, documents, the chat, the meetings, all the things that we need to do as part of the process. And also on the other side, we either create classic projects or initiatives within DevOps and epics and the various other bits and pieces that we might want to do. And we allow that to happen, whether it's in Jira or DevOps, but we pull the data backwards and forwards to make sure that we stay aligned. And that allows us to ensure that we can see the progress and we can report the progress when we need to. And then we take that progress, we take those projects that are being run or those initiatives being run, and we allow people to record their time. Maybe not times against tasks, but their time against a particular project or a particular feature. Because people are often much more interested in their resources than they are necessarily in how those resources are working on a particular task. It's not really terribly helpful, but they do want to see progress because the cost of the tasks of the resources are really, really important. And then when you bring these all together in that database I was showing you on the previous slide, that allows us to do some really clever reporting stuff to bring all these different components together and share those with our leadership inside our organization. So if we're doing it right, then we end up with dashboards that may look like this, that give us some idea of where we're spending time on different parts of the epic, on the costs, on the features that are being delivered. All of these things, where we've got variances that allow either project managers or product managers or portfolio managers or program managers, whatever they happen to be, they can see what's going on and start to address those things that are going wrong, not those things that are going right. And they do that through capturing metadata. This is a snapshot from our Power PPM solution that allows us to capture all sorts of metadata, whether it's checklists, whether it's cost, whether it's alignment to particular projects. It's not even projects that have started that aren't in a program that you want to bring into a program. We can do that. How strategic it is to us. And you can see various things along there, the governance steps that you have to go through within that project to move it along from step to step. And other sorts of dashboards that may come up that look something like this, that give us an insight into how well we're aligned with our main business objectives. And this is, again, a simple snapshot giving us a bubble view, showing us where things are in terms of their importance against their benefits that they're delivering to us, because it's benefits that are really what the organization is looking for, how well aligned we are, and then we can see which projects are adding into this particular strategic analysis that we're actually looking at. And it allows us to change and to do what ifs and all sorts of other things like that. And we think this is really, really important. And again, this is all part and parcel of our Power PPM environment. So as we head towards the close of this particular session, these are things that I think are really, really important. You need to understand what AI is going to bring. I think it's really important. There's lots of stuff out on the web about it. I do strongly recommend that people start to truly inform themselves around it, because it will be one of the key differentiators moving forward. You need to sort of have the mindset and have your organization have the mindset of working in a hybrid way. And if I talk in Microsoft terms, that may mean that you use Planner or tasking teams as it's becoming. You may use projects. You may use Agile DevOps. You may use Project for the Webs. All these different things may be the right things inside your organization. All of them, not some of them, all of them. And whether you're just doing your personal to-do list as to things that you want to do today, or an organization is trying to work out what its EPMO strategy is, all of these things can be brought together in a coherent single area. Next stop isn't really about tooling, it's about you as an individual. A good EPMO, a good PMO is going to be a good one that communicates well. It's going to be one that is actually able to explain to people why this is important. It isn't just simply about doing stuff. It's about communicating stuff. And communicating means getting people to really understand stuff. When I talk about focus on the BI, that also means make sure that you do have all the data. This, having BI which is being put together by a bunch of spreadsheets that people have filled in isn't good BI. Isn't good BI, because people put in stuff that they want you to see. It's got to be linked to real data, and it's got to give you real insight to what is going on. And I think that is really, really, really important. You need to embrace remote working. This has been forced upon us to some extent, but that's just going to be moving on and on and on. And this is part of the communication skills that I talked about. If people are working remotely, you've got to find new ways of working with them on a regular basis to keep that collegiate style, to keep that idea of teamwork. It's very easy for people to drift off and be a bunch of individuals that are working from home. You really don't want to do that. And that's really important, that you embrace it and you help people. Also, sometimes not overwork. It's very tempting to put in too many hours when you're at home, because it's always there. You get up in the morning, it's there. You go to bed at night, it's there. And sometimes you've got to actually say to people, no, that's not the right way to do it. And lastly, you've got to choose the best tools. Now, there are lots of tools out there. There are tools from all sorts of places. We're very comfortable with our tools. We would welcome you to come and take a look at them. But the reality is that you need to choose the best thing for you. because at the end of the day, you need to be successful. And that's really what we want to help our customers do. So I'd like to say thank you. Anybody who wants to connect up with me, that's my LinkedIn profile, fairly straightforward. You can ping me on Teams if you want to. That's my address. Email, very similar, unsurprisingly. Our website is there. And lastly, there's a really interesting webinar in which Peter Kessenholz walks through our Power PPM solution and a bit of controlled agility as well in it. And that's available on demand as well. So I would like to thank you for your time. I will just ask my colleagues who are on the call if there are any questions, and if they're not, I will close the session.